Welcome to today's information session for the Common Good Cyber Fund grant program. So our agenda for today's session will start with a brief introduction to the Internet Society Foundation, then walk through the Common Good Cyber Fund itself, and then move into the application process. We'll leave a meaningful block of time for questions at the end. Before we dive in, let's introduce our team. My name is Joe Dickens, and I'm an Associate Program Officer with the Foundation, supporting its Safer Internet programs. And I'll be your host for today's session. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Horlick-Cruz. I'm the Program Officer for our Safer Internet portfolio of grant programs, the Internet Society Foundation. So this includes not just Common Good Cyber Fund, but also our Global Encryption Day granting that we do and our skills program, among others. So it's a bit about me, and I'll pass it over to Jenn Beard.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be with you today. I can't actually see you, but I'm a senior program officer at the foundation, and I lead the Safer Internet programs in our community grant programs, and I'm going to pass it to Fatima Zahra.
Thank you, Jenn. Hello, everyone. My name is Fatima Zahra. I am a database specialist. Very happy to be here today, and I would be also happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, before we dive into Common Good Cyber Fund, we just figured we'd do a little introduction, a little more generally about the Internet Society Foundation, for those who may not be so familiar with our organization, just to provide a little more context around where we're coming from with the fund. So just at a high level, our vision is that the internet is for everyone, and our mission is to champion ideas and enable communities to unlock the internet's potential to tackle the world's evolving challenges. And something that I think is important to note when we talk about the foundation is that we're actually one of technically two separate but very closely linked organizations. That's where we're what's called a supporting organization of Internet Society. So Internet Society is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1992, and it is something that was set up to promote development of the internet as a global technical infrastructure, a force for good, and something that can really help everyone in the world improve their lives. In 2019, the foundation was established mainly to manage the Internet Society's grant-making work. And since that time has grown fairly significantly and now also houses Internet Society's fellowship programs, our training team, and also our e-learning staff. To learn a little more about the scale of our grant-making work, and we can hop onto that next slide. If we look at our grant-making figures from the past year, you'll see in 2025, we committed just shy of $20 million in grant funds. Those funds went out through 370 individual grants and sponsorships, and those grants made their way to organizations in 120 different countries. So we really have quite a global reach for our grant-making work, and that's something that we really take quite a lot of pride in as a funding organization. A little bit about our 2030 strategy. So since last year, both Internet Society and the Internet Society Foundation have really focused and aligned our work to lead up towards achieving two strategic goals. So that first strategic goal is that by 2030, people everywhere will have access to affordable, reliable, and resilient internet. And then the second strategic goal is that people everywhere will have an internet experience that is safe, secure, and protects them online. So as far as how Common Good Cyber Fund sits within our organizational strategy, it's really aligning with that strategic goal number 2. So that's a little bit about the foundation at a high level. We'll pass it back over to Joe to talk us through the Common Good Cyber Fund in more detail.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, with that context in place, we'll turn to just a brief overview of the fund itself. At the simplest level, the problem is that digital and cyber threats scale faster than public interest defense capacity. The nonprofit and public interest actors doing this work are dealing with faster moving threats than the funding environment was built to support. So Common Good Cyber Fund exists because much of what keeps the internet users safe is delivered by nonprofit and public interest actors, not by governments alone and not by commercial providers alone. Many of the organizations operate with funding that is irregular or too narrow for the work that they actually need to sustain. The fund is a pooled fund coordinated with multiple donors for exactly that reason, and at the same time, attacks are increasing in frequency and sophistication, and they fall especially hard on high-risk groups like NGOs, journalists, human rights defenders, and dissidents. The fund's response is to strengthen the ecosystem of cybersecurity nonprofits so they can coordinate better and provide stronger protection for internet users, especially high-risk users. The fund is designed to strengthen the global ecosystem of nonprofits that provide critical public interest cybersecurity services. The work supported through this open call should fit at least one of the 3 program objectives you see here on your screen. Some organizations will fall clearly in one lane, others may span more than one. In the application, you should choose the objective that best matches your core function, and that choice will trigger 2 objective-specific follow-up questions in the application itself. If there's an overlap, we please ask you to clarify and clearly mention that overlap elsewhere in the narrative. So on to our 3 objectives. The first objective is maintenance of critical cybersecurity infrastructure. What we mean here is the shared security capability that keeps the internet safer and more resilient for everyone. This includes infrastructure protection, shared threat detection, non-commercial threat intelligence, and tools or coordination that help others respond at scale. A simple way to think about this objective is what functions does the broader internet security ecosystem depend on, even if most users have never seen them. That might include work connected to DNS security, secure defaults, open source or open security systems, vulnerability detection, threat analysis, or other forms of public interest infrastructure that reduce risk across many users or organizations. This objective is especially relevant for organizations that already maintain, improve, or coordinate shared cybersecurity capabilities. In many cases, the need is maintenance, adaptation, reliability, and long-term stewardship. For applicants, the important point is to explain the specific function your organization performs, who relies on it, and what would become weaker or less secure if that function did not exist. The strongest fit is work that has a clear public interest value beyond one organization's internal security needs. The second objective is delivery of scalable support to secure internet users from digital harm, including state-directed cyber activity and digital transnational repression. The emphasis here is on practical protection, not just telling people that the risks exist, but helping them reduce that risk in concrete ways. For example, an organization might support journalists, human rights defenders, civil society groups, dissidents, women in public life, or other communities facing targeted digital threats. The work could be directed support, remote assistance, training tied to specific protective actions, incident response, or a model that helps local partners provide safer support themselves. The word scalable matters here. We recognize that high-risk support is often trust-based and context-specific. It does not always scale like perhaps the infrastructure support will, but applicants should still be able to explain how their approach reaches more people, improves the quality of support, builds local or regional capacity, or otherwise creates repeatable practices that others can use. Within this objective, we will also give positive consideration to organizations with a demonstrated history of addressing gender-related digital harms, including technology-facilitated gender-based violence, where that experience strengthens the protections, response, or recovery work. The key here is relevance. If gendered digital harm is part of the risk environment your users face, we want to understand how your organization has worked on that issue and how that experience informs the services you provide. The third objective is advancement of safer internet for vulnerable groups and high-risk communities, including civil society and journalists. This objective is about advocacy, coordination, evidence, and practical guidance when that work leads to concrete security improvements. It is not advocacy in the abstract. It is not general awareness work with cybersecurity label added onto it. The focus is on work that helps practices, improves safeguards, strengthens coordination, or makes the ecosystem more responsive to real threats. This is also where some work on spyware accountability, platform safeguards, digital transnational repression, and technology-facilitated gender-based violence may be especially relevant, provided that there's a clear path from the work to improve security outcomes. For example, evidence gathering, documentation coordination, or advocacy can fit if it helps reduce harm, improves response, or strengthens the protection for affected communities. One point we're saying here is that the Common Good Cyber Fund is not meant for broad cybersecurity awareness work or general digital programming unless there's a direct and credible path to stronger security outcomes. So what type of support is awarded? Our grants under this open call will range from $100,000 to $300,000 US with a 2-year grant period. The model is hybrid unrestricted. In practice, that means that funding is aligned to the program objectives we just discussed, and the work applicants describe, but it is flexible enough to support the operating needs that make deliverable possible. In addition to the grant itself, grantees will receive virtual organizational capacity building, support during implementation from the Internet Society and its foundation staff, along with external partners. And the cohort will come together at least for one in-person gathering. So on to the fun stuff, the application process. We've covered the program itself, so we would just want to go through what that application process looks like. All applicant organizations must be registered as a 501c3 nonprofit in the United States or an international equivalent, and they must have a bank account in the organization's legal name that can receive funds from a foundation based in the United States. Applications are welcome from all regions. At the portfolio level, the fund prioritizes organizations that are based in or clearly serve global majority regions, including Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia Pacific. Work can be global in scale, and regional focus work can also be in scope when the justification is clear. We've mentioned this before, but for objectives 2 and 3, we will place added value on organizations that can show credible track record of responding to gender-related digital harms, including technology-facilitated gender-based violence, where that experience is relevant to the high-risk communities they serve and to the security outcomes proposed. What do you need to apply? Applications are only accepted through Flux, our grant management system, and required materials include the narrative application through Flux, the organization's current operational budget, governing documents, tax identification number documents, a list of current institutional funders, the amounts they provide, audited financials from the 2 most recent available fiscal years, tax filings from the 2 most recent available fiscal years, and if applicable and available, 501c3 equivalency determination. A practical note here, we're looking for the current operating budget for your organization, not only the budget for the proposed grant. And if your official tax or governing documents are in a language other than English and saved as a PDF, applicants should also be ready to provide a certified PDF and a Word version. We'll drop in the chat here some reference guides in English, Spanish, and French that guide you through each one of the application questions by objective. So how are proposals evaluated? In terms of the evaluation, our independent reviewers are looking at 4 main things. First, organizational alignment. Does the applicant's mission and core work line up with at least one program objective? Second, capacity and resources. Does the organization have the staffing, governance, and operating base to deliver what it describes? Third, experience and history. Is there concrete evidence that the organization has done relevant work before and managed grants responsibly? And fourth, target audience. Does the applicant show that the organization already serves or can credibly serve the communities or geographies it describes? The strongest applications usually do a few basic things well. They answer the question asked, keep existing work separate from proposed use of funds where relevant, and make sure the narrative, budget, and supporting documents all tell the same story. For this cycle, we are primarily looking to support and grow existing work with a credible track record, not to launch entirely new projects or fund startup stage ideas. So how to apply? Organizations need to register in the Foundation's grant management system, Flux, and applications must be submitted through there. Email submissions will not be accepted, and incomplete submissions will not be considered. Applications may be submitted in English, French, or Spanish. We also cannot provide individualized application guidance during the open call, in fairness to everyone else. If your organization is new to Flux, please register early and allow at least 2 to 3 business days for the registration to be completed. Applicants must be registered in Flux at least 24 hours before the application window deadline. If you hit any technical issues, please contact the email address on your screen and in the chat as early as possible. Right. So our timeline. The application window opens on June 23rd in the Flux portal and closes August the 4th at 21 hours UTC. Internal and independent program committee reviews will take place in August and September. During that period, status updates on individual applications will not be provided. Awards are expected to be announced by November, and all applicants will be notified of their status then. So we'll now shift onto the Q&A. We may start grouping similar questions together and prioritizing the ones that are most useful to the full applicant pool. If a question is very specific to one organization's situation, we'll answer at the level of the general rule and then maybe point you to the right public resource or contact channel.
So we've got a question at the top about whether small organizations can use a fiscal sponsor to apply. So to answer that, at this time, we're really looking to grant directly to eligible organizations rather than going through fiscal sponsors. If we're doing training for youth on internet safety skills, would we be eligible? So for something like that, as we've seen through the description of the different program objectives, this isn't really something that's meant to support a sort of general outreach, but again, really things that are aligning with those particular tasks that Joe had outlined earlier. So not really general safety training outreach. We got another question about the size of applicant organizations, whether that determines the amount of grant funding that the applicant is eligible for. To answer that, we would be looking at a granting that is, I guess, within a reasonable proportion of an organization's overall operating budget. So when we look to make a grant, it wouldn't necessarily be something that would be multiple times an organization's operating budget, but really something that would fit within, I guess, the budgeting for their programs and proportional. So it really depends on the ask that's coming in. Can my organization apply without any partnerships? The answer is yes. Yes, you can certainly apply directly as just a single organization.
Brian, there's some questions about whether people are eligible if they've been around for less than 2 years and don't have financials.
Oh, sure. Yeah, as far as the age of an organization, we don't have a specific guideline around that, but I would just upload the documentation that you do have going far back as far as you can. So including whatever audited financials you have, the tax filings you have, and yeah, just do your best if you're interested in that.
There's a follow-up around the fiscal sponsor question. While there's preference for funding organizations directly, is it prohibited to be a fiscally sponsored applicant?
It's not prohibited. Not prohibited.
There's questions around where eligibility is for geography. This is not limited to US-based organizations. That's just where we're based. So we have to operate under those limitations. However, if you're eligible to receive funding from a US-based entity, whether that requires registration with your government or whether you need different processes for accepting money, we do fund worldwide and currently make grants in 135 countries. So people are asking about specific country eligibility. For India, obviously you need FICRA registration, but otherwise everyone who is not on the OFAC checklist should be eligible.
So we've got a question about what's meant by governing documents as far as what's requested to be attached to applications. So that would include things like an organization's bylaws, if there's terms of reference for a board of trustees, board of directors, that kind of thing, just outlining all of the policies that you all follow. We got a question about consortiums of organizations, whether they can apply or they're encouraged to apply. We would accept proposals for consortiums or collaborative proposals like that, but it's important that the applicant organization does have that either 501c3 or equivalent registration and organization status, and the application does have to come through one organization that will manage that fund.
Yeah, just to clarify there, the grant agreement will be signed with one lead applicant, so the funds will be managed instead by that one organization.
Also, people are asking about format for the proposal and where the proposal will be. It is not open for proposal yet. This is an info session to get you ready to think about what you might propose when the applications open June 23rd. So at that time, on the same website where you found the link to this webinar, there's the link to Flux, which Brian shared. You can register there and you'll see the application when that opens.
There's a question about whether interventions have to be in one specific country or have to be regional. There's not really a specific limitation to this. So we've funded, if you look at some of the pilot grants that we made last year, you'll see that many of those have a sort of global scope. So really can look at global scope of the work being funded through this program, or perhaps regional, just depending. But it's not necessarily a requirement that it has to be limited to a certain region.
There's a question about using generative AI to prepare proposals.
So we don't have an explicit prohibition on the use of generative AI in preparing a proposal, but of course would not advise that a generative AI be used to generate all of the content for a proposal and create something quite generic. So it's important that all the questions are being answered quite specifically. The application form will request that things like links and supplementary information are provided. So would just caution potential applicants in the use of AI in organizing their application materials.
There's another question related to, again, partnerships, consortia, and academic institutions. So in addition to what we've said about there being a lead organization that would be the recipient and the entity responsible for that grant agreement, public academic institutions with 501c3 status or their international equivalent that can demonstrate program alignment, capacity, and credible channels to apply the outcomes are invited to apply. The key question is not so much if it is an academic institution per se, but whether the work delivered offers public interest cybersecurity outcomes that align with the fund. What we are unable to support is individual researchers or research projects that are not eligible for consideration.
There's questions about getting the template available in advance. The application will be open between June 23rd and August 4th. So there should be ample time to prepare your proposal once the portal opens for submissions. There's also a lot of questions around multiple countries versus single geography. I don't know, Brian or Joe, if you want to take that, as whether there'll be preference given to single or multiple countries over a single country of focus.
There's not necessarily a preference in terms of one versus multiple countries or regions, but what we consider more is the security gaps or the service gaps that are being filled and perhaps the rationale around the need in a specific region. So not necessarily will always be prioritizing globally or regional oriented programming versus national specific ones.
Someone's asking about caps on admin or salary costs in the budgets. That's all in our standard template. So if you want to take a look, our overhead cap is 25%, and salaries are not included in indirect costs. The comment about hybrid unrestricted basically just refers to the fact that these are operating grants. However, they need to be focused on cybersecurity as it's laid out in this grant proposal. So if your organization does other work, it may be necessary when the grant agreement is written that it's clear that this money would be used for your cybersecurity activities and not for something that was not related. If you're working on housing or something that's separate. Did you guys talk about selection process? There's some questions in the chat.
We walked through the review elements that reviewers will look at. So we've got alignment with the grant program and at least one of the different objective areas, the organizational capacity and resources for implementing the programs, the experience and track record of delivering on the programs that the organizations run, history of managing funds from other credible funders, and relationships with any target audience they intend to work with. So those are really the things that will be used to evaluate proposals. And there's a couple questions that have come through about whether if an organization is already receiving grant funding from a different foundation program, if they can apply for Common Good Cyber. The answer is yes. In most cases, we permit organizations to have up to 2 grants from different funding programs from the foundation at any given time. I've seen a few questions from ISOC chapter members as well, that there's a bit of an exception there when it comes to the chapter admin fund as well. Things like that don't necessarily count towards that 2 grant cap.
Is there a preference for focus demographic, civil society, government entities? Who is the end beneficiary?
Yeah, so the fund is really intended to support the cybersecurity nonprofit community. So that would really be largely civil society organizations that would be in scope and applying for funding through the program, as opposed to any other, maybe a government agency or a private company. It's really the nonprofits that we're looking to support. There's a question about whether there's preference for collaborative applications or institutional ones. There's not any particular preference there. Again, it's really the content of the proposals that'll drive evaluation. We see one about whether an applicant can have a partner organization that is not a 501c3. That would be certainly okay. It's really the organization that is applying for the funding and managing the funding that needs to have that, the 501c3 or equivalent status. Got a question about start dates for these programs, or for the grants rather. So looking at a target start date in November of this year, as opposed to starting cleanly in January of 27, it'll start the end of 2026 is what we're looking at. Got a question of whether requested grant amounts can be lower than the minimum fund stated. This time we're not really looking to grant smaller than that. So really between that 100 and 300,000 US dollar grant range. We've got a question of if we offer any cyber awareness courses. So yeah, our colleagues who manage the Internet Society online learning platform offer a variety of courses related to cybersecurity and awareness. So would encourage you to check those out if they're of interest.
Sorry, there's 134 questions in the queue. We're trying to get through them. Thanks for your patience. There's questions about submitting more than one application. Our strong recommendation would be that you select your strongest proposal idea and submit that, and not multiple proposals per organization. We don't anticipate making multiple grants to a single organization, so we would suggest that you select what you think has the best alignment and chance of being competitive, as we suspect a rather large response to this call for proposals. There's a question or two around what monitoring evaluation will look like and reporting compliance.
Yes, so we have a MEL framework with indicators that will measure the objectives that Brian and Joe shared. And we will explain all the requirement and compliance during the orientation, but also during the application phase, you will find a high-level logic model with the main objective to achieve. And of course, we encourage each one of you also while sending the application to mention exactly how they are measuring the success and what impact they are aiming to contribute into.
There's some questions around who is funded in the pilot phase. The pilot has differences between that round and this round of funding. So that was done earlier on when the framework wasn't complete for the MEL work and we hadn't had time to build out the full program. You're certainly welcome to reference that, but that may or may not indicate who will be funded through this round of funding.
So there's a question about the overall strategy and I suppose probably the mission of an applicant organization, if that determines eligibility alone, or if cybersecurity is only one aspect of the programming or only one of the main program areas that align with one of the Common Good Cyber Fund objectives, whether that type of organization would be eligible. So we'd say yes to that if there's only a specific programming area within an organization that aligns. That could be acceptable. But again, with that hybrid unrestricted funding model, that's where we may start to put up some guardrails and restrictions and ask that funding be a little more restricted to supporting just those programs that are relevant. We've got a question about organizations in the MENA region, whether they're eligible to receive funding. The answer is yes, as long as they meet the organizational registration requirements. We got a question about how many awards will be made, how many grants will go out this year. It's hard to say exactly, but we're expecting something around 15 grants is probably what to expect. There's a question about circulating an offline version of the application template in advance of opening the application window. That is not something we typically do, but if you do go to our program webpage, There is an application guide, and the link to that was also shared in the chat earlier. And so that does walk you through all of the different application questions in detail and explains what is being asked of each one. So that content is already available if you'd like to look it over.
There's one question about advocacy work, what makes it fundable or non-fundable, and what's a tangible outcome. Once again, I think for Objective 3, which is related to the advancement of cybersecurity, we are not looking at advocacy in the abstract. We're not looking for general awareness work with just related to cybersecurity. We really want to see work that is connected with changing practices, improving safeguards. So in practical terms, we would want this to relate to policy or standards work tied to stronger protections, safer defaults, or just better safeguards. It could also include trusted reporting or coordination with other members of the cybersecurity ecosystem around vulnerabilities, abuse, or threats. Research or evidence that just helps decision makers and platforms, and especially civil society networks, understand security problems and act on them. So the practical question is, who will use that work? What will they be able to do differently because of your proposed work? If the answer is clearer escalation channels, safer institutional practices, better protection for high-risk users, and coordination across the different types of responders, then it's something that might fit this objective.
We got a couple questions about whether things like letters of endorsement or recommendation would factor in to the evaluation process. It's not something that is required, but certainly you're welcome to include those materials in your application if you wish.
There's questions about whether we anticipate having fixed grant pools per objective area or whether we will be flexible between those. And I think the answer is that we'll be flexible between those. We don't have set envelopes for each, but would be looking to award the highest, best use, strongest approaches for each of those. And to the question of how many applications we typically get, it just really depends on the call for proposals. We just closed a call for proposals that received close to 600 applications. It could be a lot. Funding multi-year for possible. These are meant to be 2-year grants. And then there's questions about whether there'll be future rounds of this funding. And the answer is also yes. We anticipate making another round in the future, at least one, maybe two. And then some of that is just funding dependent as we're still actively raising funds for this co-fund.
We've got a few questions about whether Internet Society chapters may be eligible for the fund. So really treating like any other organization, if a chapter does have that 501c3 or equivalent status and does have that established history of running certain programs that are within scope of the 3 objectives, would say it's possible to apply. But again, we're really not looking at funding new initiatives or new startup work, but really supporting work that has been ongoing with a certain proven track record of results there.
So there's a question about the grant reporting requirements. For this round of grants, we're looking at 2 windows of reporting, an interim report and an interim financial report, and at the end of the grant, a final report and a final financial report. So those would be the 2 types of reports that we would require during the 2-year grant term. And during the grant negotiation phase, we would share all the materials related to the reporting templates that we're looking to get from you during those 2 windows.
There's a question around the breakdown of the co-funded co-partners. We do not have published percentage amounts. Part of that is because this is an initiative taking place over 5 years, and the ISOC Foundation and ISOC are one of the co-funders, but also the other funders that were mentioned. For those entities and organizations not able or interested in taking government funds, there are government funders in the co-fund, and we are not making specific grants out of different pools for different grantees based on their preferences. So I would say if that's a consideration for your organization, some of it may come from government partners, just so people are aware of that.
There's a question about the budgets submitted with an application, if we have expectations around, if I understand this question, how the grant may be allocated or something to that end. But the main budget we're looking at requesting with these applications is just the operating budget for your organization for a given year. So not necessarily a grant-specific budget form.
Another, I think, question worth answering to the general group: must organizations be digital security at their core mission, or can they be nonprofits with technical expertise in digital security solutions? So we will be evaluating the applicant's mission and core work and how they align to at least one of the program objectives. In fact, you can't be a digital security service company. Nonprofits is what we're looking for, and so long as they provide work and services aligned with one of the 3 program objectives.
We've got a question about what is meant by organizations that might re-grant to smaller organizations working in the global majority. This means that it can be in scope if an applicant organization, if for some aspect of some of their programming, part of their work involves making smaller subgrants to organizations doing relevant work, that could be in scope, but there will be a field in the application form to provide details on that, because we would need to have some information at least about either who the expected partners would be, or if you already have those relationships established, just sharing about who they are in particular. So re-granting is a possible activity with grant funds.
All right, we are now past the hour, so we really want to thank everyone who joined us, and especially for all the interest and questions. So we received over 200 questions, and we still had several to answer, so we'll be sure to provide a revised frequently asked questions along with a copy of the recording of the session. Thanks again for all the work that you do and for your interest in the Common Good Cyber Fund. Please make sure you review the program page and application guide as your main references from this point on while preparing your submission, and good luck. Thank you so much.